Nebraska, winter of 1873. A woman in a doorway. Her husband died 2 days ago. The mound of frozen dirt she dug with a hand spade and the back of a hoe is the only marker he will get. Nearest neighbor, 12 miles east. She is 31 with 4 children behind her and no identity the law will recognize apart from a dead man's. No pension, no deed, no name of her own. The movies gave women like her a black dress and a rescuer on horseback. Neither one arrived. Of the 25 realities we are about to count through, which one was truly the most brutal? Hold your answer. By the end, you may change your mind. Now, before we go any further, tap that subscribe button. Stay until the end, because the last number is the most shocking of them all. This was not a rare misfortune. It was a fact of frontier arithmetic. In some mining counties west of the Mississippi by 1880, 1 in every 4 women over the age of 30 was a widow. Cholera took husbands, cave-ins took them, gunfights, blizzards, bad water, infected wounds, and the sheer violence of the land took them. And when the man dropped, nothing in the system caught the woman left standing. We are not going to Hollywood for this. We are going to the probate records, the land office files, the territorial court filings, and the census rolls where these women appear as a single letter next to their names. The letter W, widow. What follows is harder than any movie version. It belongs to women whose names most of us have never heard. We are starting at number 25, the quiet cruelties nobody talks about, and working our way up to a truth at number 1 that changes what the whole list means. Number 25. She had to handle the body herself. On a remote homestead, there was no undertaker within a day's ride. There was no ice. There was no one to call. When a man died on the open prairie, his wife washed the body, wrapped it in whatever cloth she could spare, and prepared it for the ground with her own hands. In summer, she had hours before the heat made it unbearable. In winter, the body froze, and the ground froze with it. Women across Kansas and Nebraska broke hardpan for days with mattocks and hoes, digging graves deep enough that the animals would not find them. No minister, no mourners. Just a woman, a spade, and the sound of dirt on wood. The first reality of frontier widowhood was not grief. It was labor. Number 24. The ground itself fought her. When the soil would not break, the dead waited. Across the Dakota Territory and the Northern Plains, homestead women stored bodies through the winter because the earth was locked solid as iron from November through March. Wrapped in canvas, laid in root cellars or storage sheds, a husband could wait 4 months beside the seed stores until the April thaw. Children helped dig when the time finally came. There was no scandal in this. It was simply what the land demanded. A man could die in December and not be buried until the prairie softened in April. Number 23. Mourning dress was a luxury she could not afford. Back east, Queen Victoria had turned grief into a dress code. After Prince Albert died in 1861, proper mourning demanded black crepe, jet jewelry, and a year of near total seclusion. That code crossed the Atlantic and hardened into social law. A widow who appeared in public too soon or in the wrong color was judged on sight. On the frontier, a woman owned 2 dresses if she was fortunate. She could not order black crepe from a general store that stocked flour and ammunition. She wore what she had and went back to the livestock the next morning because nothing else would feed her children. The social rules and the survival rules pulled in opposite directions from day 1. Number 22. The community decided she was available before the dirt settled. In regions where men outnumbered women 5 or 6 to 1, suitors showed up within days. In some accounts, they came to the funeral itself. This was not romance. It was economics. A widow represented a proved claim, a standing cabin, and a pair of working hands. Proposals came in the form of offers, not courtship. What she needed was time. What the territory gave her was pressure. County records from Montana and Colorado show remarriages within weeks of a death, sometimes with the ink on the burial record still drying. These women were not heartless. The frontier simply did not leave room for grief to finish. Number 21. Her name disappeared from the law. Under the legal doctrine of coverture, a married woman had no separate legal existence. Sir William Blackstone, the English jurist whose commentaries shaped American law for over a century, put it plainly. In marriage, husband and wife are one person in law, and that person is the husband. When a frontier husband died, his widow did not automatically become a legal person again. In many territories, she could not sign a contract, file a land claim, or appear in court without a male representative. The man who had served that role was in the ground behind the house. Getting the courts to recognize her standing took months of petitions, witnesses, and fees she did not have. She existed in the world. She did not yet exist in the law. We are only 5 entries deep, and none of this has ever appeared in a Western. The real weight is still ahead. Number 20. The homestead claim was not hers. The Homestead Act of 1862 allowed any head of household to claim 160 acres of public land. A married woman was not a head of household. The claim belonged to her husband. If he died before proving up, meaning 5 years of continuous residence and improvement, the claim could be challenged or revert to the government. She had to petition the local land office to continue it. The burden of proof was on her. She needed witnesses to testify she had lived on the land, improved it, and intended to stay. In a territory where neighbors lived miles apart, finding those witnesses was its own ordeal. Today, property passes to a surviving spouse almost automatically. Back then, the land she had worked for years could vanish because the name on the filing was never hers. Number 19. Dower rights meant 1/3 of nothing. Common law entitled a widow to 1/3 of her late husband's estate. On the frontier, 1/3 of a half-finished sod house, 6 head of cattle, and a breaking plow was not a livelihood. It was a slow walk toward destitution, and even that third was not guaranteed. Creditors had legal priority. The man who sold him seed, the merchant who extended store credit, the neighbor who loaned a team of horses. They all stood in line ahead of her. Probate filings from Iowa and the Nebraska Territory in the 1870s show estates where the debts exceeded the assets entirely. The widow's third of those estates was 0. The law promised her a share. The arithmetic left her with a hole. Number 18. His debts became her inheritance. The creditors did not wait for mourning to end. In a territory where cash was scarce and credit was survival, a dead man's accounts came due the week he was buried. Widows lost homes, livestock, and stored grain to satisfy debts they had no voice in taking on. She had no legal standing when the debt was incurred, but the estate was liable for every cent. The estate was everything she had. Today, a surviving spouse has legal protections against many forms of inherited debt. On the frontier, the merchant with the ledger book had more claim to that homestead than the woman living in it. Number 17. Life insurance did not exist for the men who needed it most. Life insurance was an urban invention. Metropolitan life began offering industrial policies to factory workers around 1879, but those served eastern cities. The men dying on the frontier carried nothing. His death was financially the same as a fire with no policy. There was no payout, no safety net, no letter in the mail. The moment his heart stopped, Everything she could not earn, grow, or trade for herself was gone. That gap between then and now is one most people alive today cannot fully picture. Number 16. The pension she was promised never came. Thousands of Civil War veterans went west after the war, and thousands of them died there. Their widows were entitled to federal pensions, $8 a month in the years just after the fighting ended, but getting that money required proof. Proof of his service, proof of marriage, proof of death, proof she had not remarried. These documents had to be filed with the Bureau of Pensions in Washington, and the backlog was enormous. A widow on a Montana homestead had to navigate a federal bureaucracy by mail from a post office 30 miles away. Some waited years, some waited decades, some never received a single payment. By 1890, the Bureau of Pensions was the largest administrative agency in the federal government, and still the letters kept coming back marked incomplete. Number 15. Her children could be taken from her. In 1854, Charles Loring Brace founded the Children's Aid Society in New York. His idea was to take children from destitute families in the East and send them by rail to new homes in the West. They called them the orphan trains. But many of those children were not orphans at all. They had living mothers who had been judged unable to provide. Widowhood alone was sometimes considered evidence enough. A county official or a neighbor's complaint could start the process. Between 1854 and 1929, an estimated 200,000 children were relocated this way. Some found good homes, many did not. For the widows who watched their children carried out of sight on a westbound train, the loss was not death. It was something the law dressed up as mercy. We are halfway through. Every entry so far is something the movies never showed you. And the real answer to the question I planted at the start is still coming. Number 14. She took in boarders and lost her good name. A widow with an empty room in a mining town had one obvious source of income. She rented it. The only available tenants were single men. This was an economic decision. The community treated it as a moral one. The line between a boarding house and a disreputable house was drawn not by her, but by the neighbors watching from across the road. A widow in Virginia City or Deadwood who housed minors to feed her children could find herself shut out of the church, the socials, and the good opinion of the town for doing exactly what survival demanded. Her respectability was the cost of her solvency. And in a world where reputation was the only asset a woman carried that could not be seized by a creditor, that cost was enormous. Number 13. Laundry was the widow's trade, and it broke the body doing it. Washing clothes for miners and ranch hands was one of the few paying occupations open to a woman with no trade and no capital. In the California gold camps of the 1850s, a washerwoman could earn more per week than a miner pulling color from a creek. But the work was punishing. Boiling water hauled from a well or a river. Lye soap that cracked the skin on her hands wide open. 14-hour and 16-hour days bent over a washboard in the heat. Women who took in laundry developed chronic back injuries, burns from lye, and hands so raw they bled through the cold months. It paid. And their bodies paid more. Number 12. The path from widowhood to the brothel had steps you could count. This is not a story told for shock. It is told because the math was visible and the records confirm it. Husband dies. Claim seized for debt. No trade, no family within reach, no town willing to hire a woman for wages. The boarding house failed. The laundry dried up. In the cattle towns and mining camps of Montana, Colorado, and the Texas trail towns, the documented path followed a sequence so consistent that reformers of the era described it in plain terms. It was not a choice made in freedom. It was a corridor of closed doors with one left open at the end. The women who walked through it were not fallen. they were pushed, and the towns that profited from their labor admitted what built the supply. Number 11. She could run a ranch, but not under her own name. Many frontier widows were fully capable of managing livestock, breaking horses, directing hired men, and keeping an operation solvent. The obstacle was never physical. It was the law that had made her invisible inside her marriage and did not rush to restore her afterward. She often needed a male representative to sign contracts, negotiate sales, and deal with the bank. Some used a grown son. Some hired a foreman who served as the public face. Some lied about having a husband away on business. Territorial land records show female-run operations that thrived for years under a convenient fiction. The woman drove the enterprise. A borrowed name carried the paper. And when the story of the region was written, the name on the paper was the only one that made it into the book. Number 10. Remarriage was not a love story. It was a signed contract. The pressure to remarry was economic, legal, and constant. A widow with children and approved claim was a package deal, and both sides understood the terms. Written marriage contracts from the era survive in territorial archives. Livestock counts, acreage, tools, household goods, listed and signed like a bill of sale. The woman needed legal standing and a second pair of hands. The man needed land, a roof, and someone to run the household. Today, we call this a prenuptial agreement and treat it as unusual. On the frontier, it was simply the honest version of what every remarriage already was. Love was a thing that might grow later if the arrangement held. It was never the opening offer. We are in the final 9. If you are still holding the answer you had at the start, ask yourself whether the worst thing on this list was done to these women or was simply never done for them. Number 9. In a company town, the mine owned the grief. When a miner died underground, the company needed his house for the next man down the shaft. In Butte, Montana, after the Speculator mine fire of June 8, 1917, 168 men died in a single night. The bodies were still being brought up when the company began issuing notices to the families. Some widows were given 48 hours to vacate. Families who had lived in those houses for years were told to clear out so a replacement worker could move in. The house had never been theirs. It belonged to the Anaconda Copper Mining Company. This was not unique to Butte. It was standard practice in company towns from Pennsylvania to Arizona. The widow of a miner did not just lose her husband. She lost her home the same week. The company ledger did not have a column for that. Number 8. Some widows were killed for the land under their feet. A proved-up homestead had real value. 160 acres with 5 years of improvements on it. A widow sitting alone on that ground was a target. Men who wanted the claim could try to marry her. If that failed, they could forge documents. If that failed, there was always the quiet option. Newspapers across Kansas, the Indian Territory, and the Texas Panhandle reported cases of widows found dead on their own claims under circumstances the local coroner called suspicious and the sheriff never resolved. In some cases, a new filing appeared at the land office within weeks of the burial. The motive was not passion. It was acreage. The Homestead Act that was meant to build a nation of small landholders also built a world where a woman alone on good ground was worth more to certain men gone than alive. Number 7. The widow's cabin was exile wearing the mask of charity. In some frontier communities, a single small cabin was set aside for the destitute widow and her children. It was called the widow's cabin, and living in it told the whole town exactly what you would expect. She was alive. She was fed, barely. And she was no longer part of the economy or the social fabric of the settlement. It was the frontier's version of a poorhouse without walls, but just as confining. Women who entered the widow's cabin rarely left it for anything better. Their children grew up marked by the address, and the town that provided it congratulated itself on its charity without ever asking how the woman arrived there in the first place. Number 6. The winter killed the ones nobody came for. This is the entry that earns its silence. Across the northern plains, from the Dakotas to Montana to Wyoming, isolated homestead widows were found dead when the spring thaw came. Frozen, starved, or both. Sometimes the children were beside them. There was no rescue, no neighbor breaking through the door at the last minute. The distances were real, the storms were lethal, and the people who might have helped did not come. After the blizzard of January 1888, the one they called the school children's blizzard, search parties found homesteads where entire families had perished. Some of those households were headed by widows holding a claim through a Dakota winter alone. There is no official count. Nobody was tallying the women who disappeared between November and April. Nobody was there to write them down. 5 entries remain, and the answer I have been building toward is not the one most people would guess. Number 5. She raised the next generation of the West, and nobody recorded it. This is not sentiment, it is census data. The territorial rolls of Montana, Wyoming, Colorado, and the Dakotas show that female-headed households made up a striking share of the families raising children west of the Mississippi after 1870. The people who grew up to build the towns, run the ranches, teach in the one-room schools, and populate the territories that became states were raised in large numbers by widows. Women who held claims alone. Women who ran wash lines and boarding houses and did every job a homestead demanded while raising children on their own. Today, when someone traces their family back to a frontier line, there is a real chance the person who kept it standing was a widow. The record lists her as head of household. It does not mention what that cost. Number 4. She rebuilt everything, and the law handed it to the next man who came along. Consider the sequence. A woman is widowed. She holds the claim. She works the land, manages the cattle, pays off the debts, and builds the place back from ruin over years of solitary effort. Then she remarries because the pressure and the economics and the community all demand it. And the moment she signs her name on that marriage record, the legal doctrine that erased her identity inside her first marriage does it again. Everything she accumulated as a free woman transfers to her new husband by operation of law. The livestock she raised, the fences she strung, the debts she cleared alone. Property records from Wyoming and the Oklahoma Territory show this transfer repeating across decades. She spent years earning back what the frontier took. One signature gave it away. Number 3. The frontier gave her rights first and then tried to take them back. In 1869, Wyoming Territory became the first government in the modern world to grant women the right to vote and hold property in their own names. Utah followed in 1870. Washington Territory passed similar laws in 1883, then revoked them in 1887. This was not philosophy. It was desperation. The territories needed women to stay. They needed widows to hold claims rather than abandon them. They needed female labor to keep the economy running, and the old legal fictions were collapsing under the weight of daily reality. But every one of these gains was contested, fragile, and in some cases stripped away by the next legislature. The rights the frontier extended were not gifts. They were concessions made under pressure and withdrawn the moment the pressure eased. Number 2. She was never the story. Open any dime novel printed in the 1880s. Watch any Western made between 1930 and 1970. The widow is there. She is standing in a doorway in a dark dress. She is the reason the hero rides into town, the excuse for the gunfight, the silent figure behind the glass who watches the showdown and says nothing. She is never the one the camera follows. John Wayne rescued her. Clint Eastwood avenged her. Jimmy Stewart married her. Not one of them asked what she had been doing for the 5 years before they showed up. The women who ran ranches, held homesteads, raised children alone, and rebuilt towns after every disaster were reduced to scenery by the same country they had stitched together with their own hands. The dime novelists started it. Hollywood finished the job. And we, their grandchildren, watched those films and never once saw our own grandmothers in the frame. Number 1. Widowhood was the first time she was a legal person, and the country punished her for it. This is the truth at the center of every entry on this list. Under coverture, a married woman had no separate legal existence. She could not own property in her own name. She could not sign a contract. She could not keep her own wages. She could not speak in court. She was, in the eyes of the law, not a person. And then her husband died. And for the first time in her adult life, the law could see her. She could file a claim, sign a deed, appear before a judge, and speak. Widowhood did not only take her husband, it handed her something she had never been permitted to hold: legal personhood. And every other entry on this list, every one from 25 down to 2, is what happened the moment she tried to use it. The system withheld her identity, then restored it only in catastrophe, and then punished her for exercising it. That is the most brutal reality. Not a single act of violence. An architecture. So how many women lived inside this architecture? The answer is far larger than the legend admits. By 1890, the federal census recorded hundreds of thousands of female-headed households across the western states and territories. These were not exceptions. They were a structural feature of the frontier. And the popular narrative of the West, the one we all grew up watching, the one still running on television tonight, contains almost none of them. The probate files exist. The land office records exist. The letters some of these women wrote still survive in university archives and historical society collections. The evidence was never hidden. It was simply never followed, because the people writing the story always chose someone else to put at the center. 3 hands built that silence. First, the dime novelists of the 1870s and 80s who built the Western myth around gunfighters and outlaws and never followed a widow past the doorway. Second, Hollywood, which spent 50 years placing widows in the background of every frontier film and never let the camera stay on what she did when the hero left town. John Ford filmed Monument Valley and made it immortal. He never made a picture about the woman holding a homestead alone through a winter on the northern plains. Third, the historians who for a full century organized frontier scholarship around male occupations: cattlemen, miners, soldiers, lawmen. The widows appeared in chapters called domestic arrangements, as though the women who held entire communities together were a footnote to the real narrative. None of these men lied outright. They just chose where to look. And the women they passed over did not vanish. They were simply never remembered. Here is my answer to the question I asked you at the start. The most brutal reality of being a widow in the Wild West was not starvation. It was not violence. It was not losing her children or watching her body break over a washboard. It was number 1. The architecture, a legal system that erased her inside marriage, restored her only in disaster, and punished her for every step she took as a free woman. Today, a woman whose husband dies has legal standing, property rights, survivor benefits, and a name the law recognizes without petition. Every one of those things exists because the old system failed, and the women on this list are the ones it failed against. Most of their names are gone now. The proof that they were here is in the world they left standing. Which reality would you have feared most? Tell me below. And if you want the truth behind another frontier story the movies got wrong, the next one is already waiting for you.